So the topic for this evening, the presentation topic was to be, oh wait, before I start that, I want to repeat for any of our speakers here, any of our panelists, we ask you to refrain from any discussion of any current candidates running for office during the forum to comply with our nonpartisan position here with the league. So this presentation topic that our district attorney is going to address is about structures in the DA's office that exist to manage or deter the threat of mass shootings and domestic terrorism on the local level. And we wanted to hear from you about your advice for the next DA with regard to mass shootings and domestic terrorism.
Thank you for having me here. It's a very difficult topic because, it's oftentimes random and, deadly, unfortunately. And I don't think that the laws are really set up to address issues like, obviously the laws are in place to address mass shootings where people get injured or there's gunfire, and generally our mass casualties involve gunfire or guns. But the law is not really equipped to address individuals who make the threat, even in their credible threats. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, of how we focus on those types of situations. I'll just reference a little bit that right now we have 5 youth who are in our juvenile justice center who have made what we believe are credible threats of mass shootings. And there is a crime called terrorist threats. But just because they're currently being held in juvenile hall does not necessarily mean that there will be some kind of a prosecution or conviction in juvenile. I'm sorry, it's a finding. But here's where we go with that. And I'm just going to use those youth as an example. That we believe that individuals that are involved, at least the ones that we've seen here in Alameda County, have mental health issues for sure. And it's not always easy to identify those mental health issues. The mental health challenges or other interpersonal issues that someone has who also has access to guns is very dangerous. And thankfully, not all people that make a threat will act out on that threat, but we don't know who that person will be that does follow through on the threats. And so first thing that we're doing with these young people is that we have psychologists and other alienists who are doing an evaluation, a psychological evaluation. Is this somebody who's been bullied and they're just mad and they're making a threat to shoot the bullies? Do they even have access to guns? What is it that we can do from a psychological standpoint or from a treatment standpoint to address whatever brings them to that place where they want to shoot people? That is not always easy, of course, because once they leave us, where we will prescribe treatment or we have certain rules that are put in place, especially for juveniles, and I'll talk about that in a second, in terms of access to firearms and access to guns. But once they leave our facilities and go back to wherever they go, to their family home, then we're not with them 24/7. And so this is the scary part of the entire, first of all, way too many guns in America, way too many guns. And now, and in Alameda County, we have been really burdened with a huge amount of guns being used every day throughout the whole county. And when we start talking about young people, that it becomes even more problematic, thinking that as a youth, their brain development isn't such that they can want to strike out and then calm themselves down, or want to strike out and reach out to someone who can talk them down. And so part of it is using the psychologists to help guide us. And the other part is we have put in place in California that for individuals, adults who have guns in their home, that the law says those guns need to be locked up in a gun safe with a trigger lock or some device that makes that gun inoperable. If a child is in the home, that is the law. And, it's only a misdemeanor crime to prosecute the parents, but at least it brings them into our attention that and hopefully their attention that there's an issue if they don't lock up their guns. The other sad statistic is that more children die from gunfire in America than any other condition now. And that is a completely preventable death when we start talking about firearms and how people treat firearms. In this county, we've had a strong initiative over the last several years, public relations, public outreach, and our campaign is called Save a Life, Lock Up Your Gun. And we've done a gun study that in Alameda County that we have published. Again, far too many guns on the street. But I'll give you just one example, and that is that we looked at guns in just 1 year, and those are guns, not all guns used, but guns that involving cases that we prosecuted. And we pulled a random 850 cases to look and see, was the gun registered? How did it get in the hands of the individual who used it? Where did it come from? What we found was that more than half of those 850 guns were not registered to anyone in California. So we know that guns come in from Arizona and from Nevada, where there's open carry and guns are freely available, and they're trafficked into California and sold on the streets. So that's the first thing we looked at, is that half of those guns used in crimes in Alameda County were not registered to anybody in the state of California. The second statistic that we identified was that only 9 individuals who were charged with the crime that involved a gun actually were the owner of that gun. So we know that the way in which used to be guns got into people's hands is they were either trafficked and bought on the street, or they were stolen in burglaries and in other types of crimes. Or for some, they were bought legally and then just used illegally. But when we look at the numbers of guns that have flown in, that are brought in, and then even more scary, frankly, are what we call ghost guns, which you can buy a kit online for practically no money with very clear instructions how to make a gun. We have 3D printers now that are printing guns that become operable. And we also have the ability, if someone has the ability to, with a kit, to take a regular handgun and turn it into an automatic weapon, or a rifle and turn it into an automatic weapon. So the gun issue, right, a lot of the work we do is around gun violence and addressing gun violence and trying to educate our community, educate our pediatricians and adolescent doctors who are seeing kids as part of their practice, working with schools, working with anyone that we can teach and talk to about recognizes the signs of a child in distress. And I'm focusing on children because a lot of what happens is being committed by young people, not necessarily juveniles, but young people. But here in Alameda County, with the exception of one individual who did a mass shooting several years ago at a college called Oikinois University, I think, most of the crimes that we're seeing that involve this sort of threats of mass shootings are from young people. So a lot of it is trying to keep the guns locked up and keep them out of the hands of the person who shouldn't have them. In California also, and we were part of this legislation, we do a lot of legislative work, that we also passed a law that says if somebody, it first started with police officers, had a concern about somebody's mental health, that they could seek a restraining order in civil court and have the gun authority to take the guns away. That has now been expanded to other people who have access to to others. And that includes like teachers and family members. And they're called the red flag laws. And I'm sure that this is such an important topic that people have been following what's happening in the federal government. The red flag law is one of the components of the legislation they're trying to pass to be more controlled about guns. But we take firearms away from people who have experienced mental health issues, have expressed mental health, something coming from a mental health challenge. We can take those guns away from them, and then they have to petition in order to get the legally owned guns back. And that's not an easy task, to be able to get a gun back if you've had to be hospitalized for mental health. So a lot of this, what I'm talking about, is really how do we try to identify people who are at risk, and then how do we prevent it? So, unfortunately, when we talk about youth, we know that there are parents who have guns in the house, and that's generally how young people get access to guns. It's a challenge for all of us to figure out how far can we actually go with someone who has a mental health issue and has threatened mass violence. And then they've gone even further and started to convert guns into automatic weapons to be used to be able to shoot more people. We recently had a case out of Berkeley, at UC Berkeley, where an individual who was being treated through a clinic didn't feel like he was getting enough attention. And so he sent an email in the morning to 5 people. And basically at the end said, at the end of this day, 2 people on this email will be dead. Thankfully, the police were able to identify him and bring him in. He's charged with those credible threats of violence. And we have a specific court for adults that is our behavioral health court. So people who exhibit mental health issues or behavioral health issues, can be directed to that court. That court is a treatment court. And of course, guns are completely removed, and there's a prohibition for someone who has been designated into our behavioral health court, which is in lieu of an active prosecution. And they get into pretty intensive intervention from clinicians and other people from behavioral health and people who contract with behavioral health. But it's voluntary. And that's another problem, is that we have people who choose not to go into behavioral health court. And so we're just more aggressive at making sure that they can't have guns again. And I wish I had more positive news, but it's pretty easy to get a gun in Alameda County on the street. It's pretty easy to buy a gun for $25 or $50. And more often than not, those guns are stolen, or they've been trafficked into California from one of the other states that we talked about. So we try to use the psychology intervention for people that we know about. We have set up courts for people that will deal with them from a psychological clinician way, and still preventing them from having guns, legally having guns. And if somebody declines and they refuse to go into behavioral health court, and they've made a credible threat, and they have access to firearms, then they'll be prosecuted. And if they're convicted, then we have a different, then it's not voluntary necessarily. The court will order them into treatment, or will order them into a program, or whatever is appropriate as identified by a therapist or a psychologist who's doing an assessment. Our behavioral health court is very busy and is full all the time. But we have a couple of courts that really focus on that. The other program that we have set up recently to try to address and catch them early on, and especially people that have mental health issues, is we created a program called CARES. And we call it a CARES Navigation Center. We opened the first one in the Fruitvale. And what it is an alternative for the police if they identify somebody with mental health or substance use, with people that have guns that are high or using drugs, can also have that no impulse control and use a gun in anger, or use a gun to whatever reason. And so for those individuals that are committing the lower level crimes that are demonstrating that mental health issue or substance use issue, the police can bring them to the CARES Navigation Center, where we staff it with clinicians, and with peer support specialists. Peer support specialists are all people that have themselves been criminal justice involved, and they work as a support system for somebody who's we're trying to deflect them away from criminal justice and into behavioral health and into a more confined situation if that's necessary, or at least into programs that they will participate in. And then these peer support specialists will continue to stay with them as a support mechanism once they leave the CARES Navigation Center. We're looking at building 2 more. It's been incredibly successful in being able to deflect people away from jail and into a program where they can actually, somebody can address the psychological issues that are bringing someone to think about shooting a person or doing some kind of a mass injury. I shared with you our campaign about save a life, lock up your gun. We're pretty aggressive when we identify an adult who has children in the home that have guns that are not locked up, and we will prosecute them. And it's not a prosecution that is necessarily going to stay on their record because it's a misdemeanor, but at least it brings attention and brings a spotlight on them. Law enforcement also has in Alameda County, we get a list from the Department of Justice that tells us which people have had an intervention for psychological issues. It also, on that list, identify people who legally have a firearm. And so law enforcement can go knock on the door and take the firearm away from that person. And that's, again, a very important role. There are a lot in Alameda County, and it's very difficult to track people down or to divert police away from their general duties that they're doing day in and day out. But we have a task force, and I think once or twice a month, the task force goes out and knocks on doors to try to take guns away. That's a very scary process also, could be anyway, where somebody has a gun, the police are knocking on the door asking to take their gun away. We haven't had an incident, but in other counties, there have been incidents where somebody doesn't want to give up their gun, they're afraid of the police, and there's a shooting that happens. Either they shoot at the police or the police shoot back. And so there between our red flag laws, between trying to identify people with psychological issues who also have access to guns, trying to really address the influx of guns that are in our county, way too many guns on our streets in the hands of too many people, especially young people. And again, we recognize that for young people, they don't always have the same process of, I'm mad at this person, I've got a gun in my hand, I'm going to shoot him, as opposed to, let me step away from this for a second and try to process whatever is going on. So with the kids, with the young people, we're really focused on that. We appreciate when teachers speak up. And, I know when a teacher starts to suspect something involving a child who's making threats, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks with kids in our community, that the teachers are letting law enforcement know so that law enforcement can intervene with some of the red flag laws, in other ways that we can intervene, and hopefully we will prevent any mass shootings that could be done by either a child, a young person, or an adult who has psychological issues. It's different from gang violence. There's a lot of gang violence going on too. And that is a completely different way in which we address guns and use of guns and the unbelievable number of shootings that we have, even by some young people, not because they have a psychological issue and they're trying to shoot somebody that they're mad at, but because they have guns in their hands and they're, for whatever reason. I mean, I have a lot of theories on why these young people are robbing people and stealing cars and carjacking with guns in their hands. But in those cases, again, that there's no way that we would really that we would well, I will say that for every case that involves somebody who is not the gang members or that kind of street level violence, but particularly for people who are making threats of mass shootings, the police, and the police are the front line. So we don't have the cases until the police bring them to us. But when they do bring them to us, or we're working in conjunction with the police, then we have a very different pathway for dealing with that person than we would if it's just gang violence or gun violence on the street. What is scary about it all is that we don't know what happens once they leave us. And we hope that through intervention that we can deflect and address whatever issues there are, remove access to guns to the extent we can. But it's, we truthfully do as much as we can do, and then just try to keep our eye on the youth, or try to keep our eye on the person who has made the credible threat for mass shootings. And that's scary.
Thank you. Speaking again about the possibility of mass shooters, is it true that young people who become mass shooters exhibit warning signs before they carry out those acts?
So young people are more likely to declare that they're going to shoot somebody, or they're going to go shoot something up. Young people, this is where training teachers and training, like in the summertime, youth group leaders or other people that have access to children and see them, when they start seeing somebody who is having a psychological challenge. With children, it's not so easy to mask it. They're much more transparent than an adult who is not necessarily going to be obvious. But with children and young people, yes, we train people, we train teachers, law enforcement for sure knows the signs, especially as we've seen more gun violence and things like that, especially with younger people that we've seen in Alameda County as young as 12 years old who have guns in their hands and they're committing crimes. And the whole juvenile justice system is changing right now. We're in a reform mode. The Department of Juvenile Justice, which was where more youth that committed more egregious crimes, more serious crimes, would go to the youth authority called Department of Juvenile Justice. That's closing in 1 year. So right now there are only 62 youth left in the Department of Juvenile Justice. Alameda County, we didn't really send very many kids there. We dealt with them locally, and for the most part, pretty effectively through our interventions and our programs. But it's all of it is keeping our eyes open and never taking anything for granted. So even if it's a mistake, at least somebody is checking in, and we tell that to teachers, we tell it to parents, we tell it to neighbors. I see a lot of stuff on Nextdoor, actually, and when I read something on Nextdoor, I contact the person who's posted that something was going on. Give us more information so we can follow up before something happens. And I think that it's just having eyes and ears open to try to identify somebody. And if we're wrong, we're wrong. That's the end of it. But if we're right, then we have saved lives, especially for kids that have guns. And this 3D printer of guns, and a youth having access to a 3D printer in their own home is pretty scary.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder about this huge change with juvenile justice in California. On that tangent, you've mentioned some of the programs that Alameda County specifically has. Can you tell us about programs serving Alameda County youth that are going to continue beyond your term?
Oh, for sure. Yes. So we've created a lot of programs. We many years back, maybe 10 years now, we introduced restorative justice in our juvenile justice facility, and we've tracked as many of the youth as we can. And I'm really proud to say that the recidivism of, meaning ever seeing them again in juvenile or in adult court, has been less than 15%. So through restorative justice, and only about 50%, as you know, restorative justice is the youth and the person, the crime victim, so to speak, and then a moderator. And sometimes it's a larger circle. About 50% of the victims of the crime did not participate, but we have surrogates who are there. Because the bottom line is we hope for the victims that don't participate that they can process their anger and fear and all the things that go along with being a crime victim. But we especially are providing the same interventions that circles, restorative justice circles, provide for young people, and they can have a realization of what their experience has been. We also have, we've had a very robust program about keeping kids in school. And truancy is, I mean, I don't even like that term anymore, truancy. I say our program's called Stay in School. And we start with kids who are as young as second or third grade in that regard, who are already in the habit of not going to school. But with our older kids, there's a lot of work to be done with some of them. They're angry at their own parent, and they stop going to school. We partner with a program. It's called OK Kids, and it's run out of Axel Gospel Church in East Oakland. And the Oakland Police Department are the staff. So these young people get referred into that program. It's been hugely successful. And they are working with police officers and building that rapport, and then other people too, obviously, are participating. But it's been hugely successful, really recognized across the United States, and other states and other communities have replicated what we do with the OK Kids program. The other thing that we have supported, and it came out of the Sheriff's Department, is their Deputy Sheriff's Association. They call it DSAL. They have gone into the unincorporated parts of Alameda County, particularly San Lorenzo, which used to be very challenging from a criminal justice standpoint. And they have built fields like baseball fields and soccer fields, and through their association, they provide all the equipment. They have kids in boxing classes, and they're very much involved as sponsoring youth programs that have been very effective. And then the other program that Alameda County and we have participated in is a center in right on the border of Oakland and San Leandro, down the hill from where Juvenile Hall is. And it's an all serve all needs center for youth. Again, hugely successful. The reduction in recidivism is tremendous. The back in school full time is tremendous. And so for kids that are at risk, those are some of the programs that we're dealing with. But we also know that there are kids who, you wouldn't look at a straight A student at a high school in Oakland and say, well, that child has problems. But there's a lot of pressure on kids sometimes to perform, and their psychological challenges are very real. And, if they get an A-, it's the end of the world. And if they have access to guns, then we're still focusing on them. So within my office, we have a Justice Academy. We have a Young Women's Empowerment Program for teenagers. So a lot of the work that we're doing around teens is work that's been embedded for a number of years. And I have full expectation, hopefully, and hope that they would all continue because they're successful programs.
Thank you so much. I wish we could go on, but and I'm sure you'd have more to say and that we'd love to hear, but we're going to have to move on to the rest of the program. But thanks so much for joining us this evening. And
you're welcome. And am I done with you now?
I think so.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you so much.
All right. So now we're going to move to the rest of the program. And I guess we have panelists that are joining us this evening that represent the three cities of our league here: Berkeley, Albany, and Emeryville. Before I introduce them, I want to let the audience know that you're welcome to write in a question into for these individuals if you should so wish. but please direct it to the particular panelist. And the central question we are going to ask all of these representatives to answer are that there are concerns across the country about rising crime and police abuse of power. What are the top 2 or 3 public safety challenges and opportunities as they relate to crime or police accountability in your city? And also, what are your evidence-based plans to address these concerns in the near term and year ahead? And you'll each have 5 minutes to respond. And joining us here this evening are Berkeley District 2 Councilmember Terry Taplin, Berkeley Police Lieutenant Melanie Turner. And we will go in order for these questions, this initial questions, starting with Berkeley. Also from Berkeley Reimagining Public Safety Task Force member Hector Malvido. And then from Albany is Greg Downs here. Yes, Greg Downs is here, who is a member of the Albany Community Task Force on Policing, and also is the commission chair on the Social and Economic Justice Commission. And joining us from Emeryville is Emeryville City Council member Courtney Welch. So, Councilmember Taplin, would you like me to repeat the question or?
No, thank you. Thanks for having us, and it's good to see some familiar faces. So I serve on the city's Public Safety Policy Committee, and I am the council liaison to the Berkeley Albany Mental Health Commission. Since the beginning of my term, shootings and gun crimes have been a major focus for my office. Some prevalent factors I believe behind these and other crimes we're seeing in Berkeley include widespread access to legal firearms and the proliferation of ghost guns, structural barriers to mental health access, and breakdowns in our local mental health infrastructure, and economic distress and cycles of poverty. To address these things, last year I passed a prohibition on unserialized precursor firearm parts used to assemble ghost guns, and that has recently gone to effect, that ordinance. And this year I've obtained funding to launch a gun violence intervention program based on the ceasefire model in collaboration with field experts and community partners. The city is launching a specialized care unit to provide a non-law enforcement first response to calls for service relating to mental health crises. And council also passed my proposal to establish a crisis stabilization center based on successful models in Bend, Oregon. As part of the renewal of the 30-year development agreement between the city of Berkeley and Bayer Healthcare, I worked with Mayor Arreguín to secure $32 million in community benefits that we are using to launch a West Berkeley fund to support health equity, STEM education, and economic justice programs serving low-income communities of color in West and South Berkeley. Most recently, I've introduced an item to establish a guaranteed basic income pilot and a reentry employment program for formerly incarcerated individuals, as well as capacity building and administrative support for community-based organizations partnering with the city within the Office of Racial Equity. I've also passed proposals to expand BPD's downtown bike force and launch a community policing flex team based on the SARA model to work in partnership with neighborhoods and commercial districts to proactively solve problems before issues arise. A lot of these things are nascent and will take some time to get off the ground, and we have to figure out where we have overlap and divergence from the county, but the city is very committed to not only improving, but transforming the way we conduct public safety. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. And now it would be great to hear from Lieutenant Turner about the same subject. Do you need me to readdress the question?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for having us. I know Chief Lewis was supposed to be here, but she wasn't able to make it tonight, so I'm filling in for her. I'll do my best. I'm not Chief Lewis, but I'll do my best. So for us, the biggest challenges right now for us would be as Councilmember Taplin mentioned, it's our gun crime and property crimes. And second would be actually our staffing. So the first thing I want to talk about is the property crimes and gun crime. One of the things that we've done is really tried to improve the ways in which we capture data and the ways that we analyze it and look at it to share both internally to our cops and externally to our community members. So we recently created an office, our strategic analyst team. We have 2 analysts now that work full time that are constantly crunching our data as it's coming in from our calls for service and from our officers in the day-to-day work that they're doing. And we have access to that as law enforcement. We're able to utilize that data to help us solve crime, whether it's as a patrol officer in your day-to-day functions or as a detective. Second is our strategic analyst team also created our transparency hub. And that's something, if you Google our City of Berkeley Transparency Hub, you'll find it online. And what this was just launched a few weeks ago, actually, and it allows the public to look at our data to include our calls for service, our use of force data, our stop data, and some of our community trends and community engagement work. So we're really excited about that, and we've heard some positive feedback from our community, and we're hoping that it shows people our transparency, which is why it's called Transparency Hub, but that it shows our commitment to being open with our information. The second thing, as I mentioned, that we're challenged with right now is our staffing, and our staffing is the lowest that I've ever seen it while I've been here about 18 years. And so we're finding the right law enforcement officer to work here in the city of Berkeley is tough. It's tough all over the country, but we're trying to, there's quantity, but we want to make sure we have the right quality of candidates. And so our hiring teams are working on trying to find ways to identify those individuals and to find the right people to serve our city. And that all comes back to, community safety for everybody. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And now we'll hear from Mr. Malvido.
Hey everyone, my name is Hector Malvido. My pronouns are he, him, and él. And I'm not only a member of the Reimagine Public Safety Task Force, but I'm also really proud to be a member of the community group called Latinas Unidas at Berkeley. I think these are great questions. The first one, like, what is a public safety challenge that we see in Berkeley? I mean, obviously the biggest one that we've seen is the gun violence. It happens down the street from where I live. I live in District 2, as well as other neighbors and community members and families and youth that are affected and impacted by gun violence, perhaps in such a different way that requires like a nuanced approach, right? Like I think a lot of the biggest thing we have to think about is like when we're talking about this urgency of like addressing community violence, like I think there's a balance of like, what are we willing to do and what are some of the solutions that we're proposing and what are the impacts, the long-term impacts that they have on the communities that we're looking to serve. So for instance, like when we're talking about, gun violence, there are a bunch of different opportunities that come from that. As Councilmember Taplin mentioned, the ceasefire program, as well as other programs that have been tried nationwide, and even here in Alameda County, like gun buyback programs, they're all like different triages to address this problem, right? There's not one size sort of fix all program or policy that's gonna solve gun violence. The truth is, like, gun violence, as we all know, especially when it comes to gun violence in communities of color, is a direct result of economic oppression, of the current situations that we have today, the social determinants of health, housing, education, access to income, ability to overcome those barriers. like the reality is like, again, like balancing this, like we need to address this urgently. I think addressing this urgently also means like investing in the very many different things that we can to equalize and support those communities from being in those positions, right? In those economic straits where, as we all saw during the pandemic, laid bare many of these inequities, as we see in California, across the state and across the country. Many things that impact the youth's ability to function, to be happy, and families to be healthy were put at risk for simply just existing, housing, losing their jobs, their source of income gone. So in California, the rental debt was like in $3.5 billion or something like that. And most of that was shouldered on low-income communities of color. That's just one of sort of like the core pillars of what are some of the challenges that again, set the foundation for these results to happen, for a lot of these things to occur. So as cities and as community organizers, it's our like responsibility to look at these things and start to think about like, where can we really invest our funds to affect this in the long term, sustainably, restoratively, without causing more and more harm in the future. Sorry for that long one, but this is very important, I think, to this topic. You know, when we talk about public safety in a public forum, one of the biggest things and biggest challenges that our constituents have, the Latino community, which there are 17,000 of in Berkeley, many of them are in their own homes, right? They're native Spanish-speaking community members. They themselves are excluded from participating in conversations that happen at city council and in different commissions simply because of the fact that they don't speak English. This is just one of those barriers, right? That's preventing our community members who are overly represented in the disparities, but underrepresented in these discussions that we have to start talking about and addressing. Because when we talk about public safety, I mean, if we're being honest, a lot of the conversations are carried by people who have access, by people who can come to Zoom calls until midnight, who don't have an ability to like wait, who don't have to wake up at 4 a.m. and go to work, who don't have like 3 different kids that they got to take care of and all this other stuff. I'm sure there are people like that out there, definitely. And kudos to them. But for the most part, this creates a big barrier for people to be able to participate. And this is, again, one of the public challenges. And also really the challenge gives us an opportunity, right? How do we create those opportunities for people to start participating? How do we allocate funding so that we can start including people and participating in these conversations to get their represented as they have been historically?
Okay, thank you. And now Greg Downs, who was, oops.
Hi. Hi, I'm glad to be here, and I enjoyed speaking at a forum, I guess it was last year, on some similar issues. As the introduction said, I used to be the chair of the Social and Economic Justice Commission, which was advocating for the creation of a public commission or public oversight of policing. It's been and then I was appointed to 2 different task forces to investigate it. The possibility. And we are at the point now, after more than 2 years of applications being out for the creation of a public commission. And so I think this reflects both the sort of size and sometimes the ways in other ways in which Albany can be behind our larger neighbor and more sophisticated neighbor to our immediate south in terms of our own processes that we're playing catch up in terms of public engagement with the police. The goal of the commission and the way that it was established would allow for, it doesn't have all the abilities or powers of the ones in Berkeley or in other places, but it would allow for a request to council for outside investigation of complaints. It would create a forum for public feedback, a forum for review of budget, and a forum for dialogue about some of the nitty-gritty policy details that you've heard about under discussion in Berkeley as well as in other places. The 2-year process produced a whole range of questions and suggestions about policy changes, budget issues, and other practices. And to their credit, Albany Police have responded and examined and respond to many of those questions. But until we get the commission going, it's sort of been a scattershot rather than a sustained engagement. As I said, the applications for that are currently open. I hope that it'll be seated soon and reach that turning point in the process. But there is still time if any Albany residents are on the call, or anyone who is or knows of a student at an Albany High School, whether they're a resident of Albany or not, to apply, even if they aren't subject area experts. As with most of our commissions in Albany, given its size and reliance on volunteers, we need people who are willing to learn on the spot. And so I encourage you to encourage others to do so. So that's a sort of crucial threshold that we've been at, and that I hope we're about to reach a next stage of work that'll be possible. Along the way, there's been a number of questions that hopefully will be able to be addressed over time on the commission about budgeting practices and overall budget levels, and how to build a sustainable practice for keeping the budget under control as other forms of the city budget face pressures. And these are in response to the kind of range of concerns about police budget and police practices that we see that aren't specifically unique to Albany, but that have been general. In terms of relationship to the parts of the questions about crime, the 2 key points of crime that I am aware of, that have generated a lot of public concern in Albany have, one, been a series of assaults in North Berkeley and Albany, some of which may have been interrelated, and which I believe it was Berkeley police made an arrest in one of those series. Probably in conjunction with working with Albany Police. We're investigating the ones here, many of which were in broad daylight, and some of which were targeted at children and youth. So that has been a sort of point of concern over the last probably 4 weeks or so. And then ongoing, questions and concerns from the retail community, especially along Solano, about burglary, as well as burglaries in catalytic converter and other forms of burglaries at neighboring residential areas. In terms of building evidence-based plans, is that part of the question? The goal of the commission is to get and to disseminate the kind of data and information that would be able to go from kind of nascent concerns toward definitions of what problems are and how to address them. I do know that the police have been engaged in their own parallel process of engagement with the business community, residential areas, and others about burglary, about public safety, and other issues. And they just released a crime graphics site that promises to, I think it opened this month, but promises to allow for a level of up-to-date engagement with police activity and crime and reported crimes that hasn't been possible, until recently. So that's sort of where we stand. In some ways, in many ways, as in other things, we're behind Berkeley. But I hope and believe that the commission will allow us to start to implement ongoing viable dialogic processes in Albany.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to hear from Councilmember Welch.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you for having me on tonight. So with Emeryville, we're a little bit different because we're not necessarily dealing with a lot of the violent crime, but what we're seeing is a lot of the organized retail crime. And I took some notes just to make sure I didn't miss all of my points. But yeah, the organized retail crime is a big issue. Also, just our public and both private infrastructure. We're close to, of course, Highway 80. That's been identified as a key highway for organized crime rings to use as just a getaway access in and out to cities. So because of one of our core retail locations is just literally right off the freeway, It is a key target for organized retail crime where people come in. I mean, we've all seen the videos. People come in, 5 or 6 folks, they grab what they can, they then go to a getaway car and they're off. And even though Emeryville is geographically a lot smaller, so it's easier to patrol, and our police department has a very awesome response time when you've got trained criminals who know how to get in and out, know how to distract retail employees. They look for weaknesses in retail locations. It can be very difficult to stop those type of heists from happening. And with our private infrastructure, what I mean by that is just how some of our both single family neighborhoods and our multifamily properties have been built. A lot of folks in our single family neighborhoods don't have garages, so their cars are vulnerable to break-ins or catalytic converter thefts, which can be a problem. Also, some of our multifamily properties don't have secure parking, so the same situation can happen there. Also, with mailroom thefts, some of the older buildings were built with specifically very vulnerable mailrooms where they're right at the door when you walk into the lobby and accessible if someone is maybe running in when someone's coming out, or if the door is left open for whatever reason, they can go in and then take packages that aren't locked up. Some of the newer properties have been built with more secure mailroom locations, Amazon lockers. They have package rooms that can only be accessed with a key fob. Also, just general awareness. A lot of you are from the East Bay and know Emeryville is home to a number of hotels. So we do get a lot of visitors who may not be as vigilant when it comes to leaving things in their car. See it all the time, folks with out-of-state plates, and there's a broken window and they might have left, you know, their luggage from the airport in the back seat visible, and thieves come by and they break into the car and they're able again to just get in and out and take the luggage with them. So those are some of the things that we've really been struggling with in Emeryville. But some of the opportunities are, again, we're a smaller city, and that does mean we have a smaller police force, but it's easy to know your neighbors. We all look out for each other here. It's very easy to share information, not just with residents, but also business owners, also employees. And there's a real strong sense of community togetherness. Patrolling, again, is easy because we're geographically smaller, and making changes and outreach is a lot easier. Also, Chief Jennings, who spoke with the league before, he's been really adamant about implicit bias training, de-escalation training, and stress management training for our officers as well. So I'm really excited to have him at the helm of our police department. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you. The rest of this, we're going to get to each of you again with another question. We have a hard deadline of 8 o'clock, but this time you'll each get your individual question, and it will be limited to 3-minute time period. So we're going to go back and start with Councilman Taplin again. And for you, I want to ask, how is increasing gun violence in Berkeley currently being addressed?
So we, as I mentioned in my intro, a number of the things that we're doing. Last year we saw 51 shootings. Fortunately, there were no injuries. This year we've seen 7 injuries and 2 homicides. Well, a big part of our reimagining process did consider gun violence. So we're trying to get ceasefire going and trying to think through other things like the possibility of gun buybacks. We've also seen gun violence happening in and or around the high school. And so BUSD is also trying to work through improvements to their safety plans. That's one thing they'll be doing this summer. Mel Turner could probably speak to more operational things that the department is doing. But on the council side, things like ceasefire, things like investing in some of our community partners like Voices Against Violence. We've been able to leverage our neighborhood networks to sort of help residents and my office and the department identify, what are the various factors on the ground in each of the neighborhoods. Unfortunately, we've seen gunfire in all of the neighborhoods in our district. Sometimes it's DV, sometimes it's kind of other kinds of interpersonal conflict. So for each scenario, for example, there was a young woman on Acton Street who was the target of a shooter on 3 continuous occasions. So we worked with BOSS and the Women's Daytime Drop-In Center and the county to get the young woman rehoused. And that's something we were, fortunately able to do. But I think there are so many different kinds of shootings and shooters. There are so many different kinds of conflicts and factors. It's going to take a lot of time and resources to really improve upon our systems approach there. It's been such a sharp increase so quickly over the past few years that we're kind of swimming upstream of it and trying to sort of patch all the holes before new holes form, and we're not always able to do so.
Could you also explain what ceasefire is? Because some may not be aware of that.
Certainly. So ceasefire is an intervention model where if someone has been shot, there is a network of folks in the faith community and hospitals, other folks who can work with the victims and their social contacts to prevent retaliation. That's basically what the model is intended to do, is to intervene before there's retaliation for someone being shot. But it's largely a partnership between hospitals, faith community, cities, and other community partners. Some cities manage it in-house. Some cities contract with agencies, and so we'll be looking at the various options. So we've been working with folks in Richmond and San Francisco and Oakland, and my office is putting together a working group as well. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Council Member. Okay, and now Lieutenant Turner, how do we address gun violence without resorting to over-policing?
I think we use our data, and we've talked about this, even in some of the meetings we've had with community members in Councilmember Taplin's district. We talked about this over the summer, last summer, and that is to use information that we can rely on to make our decisions. It's not just haphazardly going around, hoping that you're going to find a car that has a firearm in it, or you're going to find the person who's on parole who has a gun, or you're using solid, credible information that you've gathered from the community relationships that you have built, and the information that we have gotten from our investigations, from our interviews, and from our calls for service. And that is the model that we're really trying to work towards. And I think we're taking steps in that direction. But if you're using data and relying on that information, then you should be making your stops and making contacts based on that information.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Malvito, how did and how does the Police Accountability Board and the reimagining team and Berkeley PD work together?
That's a great question. So from my understanding, the Berkeley the Police Accountability Board, right, is comprised of community members and different experts, right? And their function is to essentially field complaints, study and analyze sort of like the police data, report back, be a liaison essentially between the police and all of that high level data and the community. The group that was there before, that was there for a while, I think from my understanding, at least people in my community didn't even know that that group existed. And I think that, again, lines up with like how immersed are these groups, are these accountability bodies, these boards actually engaging with some of the community members that are not, again, the usual suspects of like engaging in these kinds of conversations, going to these meetings, so on and so forth. The Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, on the other hand, we worked with the police department throughout the process, right? We had a series of presentations that were overwhelmingly centered around the police department and like their training and like their professionalism and all this really good stuff. And what we learned was that we needed to dig deeper and learn more about what are some of the different things that the community was wanting and not just the perspective from the police department. And if I'm being honest, the work that the commissioners on that task force did to put together a community report, essentially one that was aside from the consultant and really was in response to the consultant's reports and recommendations, was what was adopted by city council, right? It was like that framework of like, we want these kinds of alternatives and these kinds of different reimaginings to come up, and like, we want, this is what the paradigm shift looks like. What our relationship is with the police department, I would say like it's good. Like our job is essentially to help implement that, and like through conversation and through building bridges, and like holding those kinds of conversations can be challenging because we'll be on the opposite ends of things often, right? Like obviously like the police department has a long history of like serving the community in Berkeley and again, like responding in the way that we need them to respond, but also they have a very long history of racial discrimination and yield rates, and that are disproportionately targeting people of color. So those kinds of, that kind of relationship, I think, requires constant engagement and conversation, and also an acknowledgement that like, listen, like this is what we did. This is the opportunity that we have in front of us of working together as both a body of the government that's here to support and do investigations and like really focus on what the crime is, while also as a task force, our role is to help alleviate what some of those tasks are that the police is burdened with for too long, like the SEU, like BERC, those kinds of things, so that the police do what they do best, which is solving crimes and like investigating and so on and so forth. So our relationship really is, at the very end of all of this, is tied to optimizing public safety for everyone, right? Every single person in Berkeley, and optimizing it in a way that doesn't cause harm for people of color, that doesn't dig into the history of racial discrimination, and doesn't enact policies that will surveil, that will make us feel like we're not trusted members of our city, of our society, simply because of the communities that we live in, and simply because of the things that are happening around us.
Okay, thank you very much. Now on to Albany for Mr. Downs. How does Albany plan to publicize the new policing commission to the Albany community?
This is an ongoing challenge, and I do think that city staff have worked and tried different ways to address it. And I also don't think that we have arrived at a really viable solution. Certainly, city staff has, especially during the pandemic, expanded their use of different social media and electronic forms of communication. Obviously, those don't reach everyone in the community, especially there are, populations that, can, especially be left out. We have, there are, kiosks up and down Solano. There are efforts to utilize those. There's an ongoing issue of communication with University Village, which is part of the University of California, Berkeley, but is within Albany town lines, and which does have get some of its policing services from the UC Police Department, but they are Albany residents, and it tends to be quite difficult, possibly, for lack of effective efforts at trying, but also sometimes because of the sort of speed with which people move in and out of the village to establish those. So, a danger in this scenario is that you get different clusters of highly involved people, sometimes competing clusters of highly involved people who really pay close attention, and many other people who don't, as well as you had a large number of people at the start of the 2-year process of pressing for this who were involved, and over 2 years, and multiple iterations of different task force and study commissions, that number has dwindled significantly. So I think there really is a need to, both go back to people who were involved early on and see if this is a place where they can recommit, to reach out to others. But I don't have the sort of one size fits all form. There's social media, there's email, etc. There's the kiosks, there's mailers, and yet it's also very clear that a lot of times information is falling through the cracks. Part of it is appointing, once people are appointed people who are themselves really active about trying to disseminate information and hope that those communication networks read out. But it's a challenge that we face.
Thank you. Would you happen to know if the city of Albany has had any gun buyback programs ever?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer.
Okay, all right. Sorry, thank you very much. Let's then move on to Councilmember Welch. And the same question about the buyback. Do you know if Emeryville has ever had such a program before?
I do not know the answer to that. My assumption is probably not.
Okay.
As being a smaller department, I'm not sure that they would
Sure.
operate a program such as the buyback program.
Sure. Okay, then another question. Has there been any collaboration between the city council, police department, and the school board on gun safety there in Emeryville?
Gun safety as far as preventing gun violence in schools? We have had community resource officers within the schools before. So we haven't had, since my time on council in the past 6 months, we haven't had a specific conversation about gun safety. However, just general safety in schools, especially around traffic violence and general health and wellness. Sorry, you'll hear the famous Emeryville Amtrak going on behind me. But we've had collaboration around that, but not specifically to address gun violence. But I do feel that we in the city, not just us on the city council, but also our police department, our school board as well, that's something that's obviously been at the top of everyone's mind, given the recent incidents that have taken place all across the nation. So to me, it wouldn't hurt for us to have a conversation about it as a community on what we can do around safety measures to prevent something like that happening in our own city.
Okay, thank you very much. And then also let me ask Lieutenant Turner about the gun buyback program and if Berkeley has ever participated in one and if those are deemed effective.
So in my time here, I'm not aware that we've ever done a gun buyback program here. We obviously will accept firearms. People will bring us firearms to secure and have destroyed. I'm not aware of a time that we've done a gun buyback program here.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And since I've run out of the questions directed at individuals, let me ask this general question, and if any of the panelists would like to answer, what do you think about the social media Nextdoor app and how much of what people are reflecting on there is true or is fear mongering or exaggerating what is actually happening for crime in their communities?
I'd be happy just to start us off. For me, I find Nextdoor really helpful, especially identifying just different trends, especially serving on the Public Safety Committee and getting some of the statistics from the officers, having discussions about things people have experienced around crime just candidly feels helpful for me as a council member and someone who works actively just in my role with our both police and fire department. I feel like social media platforms, yes, there can be some range of exaggeration, especially sometimes when it comes to folks potentially profiling individuals. But when people are, especially residents, are reporting things like my catalytic converter got stolen again, like that has to be taken seriously. No one's just going to vent about being the victim of a property crime again and again, or if sometimes people will post videos from their Ring doorbell, and you might be able to see or identify someone. I think in general, it can be helpful. Of course, the more profiling types of posts you have to take with a grain of salt. But me personally, I do find it helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Malvito, do you have anything to address further about the gun buyback programs?
Just that, I mean, the often our back program as a standalone program, and the truth is, it's like no program is completely 100% effective at reducing gun violence on its own and by itself, right? Like not policing, not ceasefire, not gun buybacks, none of that stuff without proper and robust investment, right? And like working together and like building bridges and relationships, will that stuff work? From my like view, right? From someone who grew up in the hood, from someone who understands what guns mean in the hands of someone who got angry, right? Who is settling a dispute, who is maybe falling into the wrong crowd because that's who they feel belonging with, right? I was very much, in my own experience, easily could have gone in a different direction, would it not have been for my mentors, for the people who in my lifetime gave me the opportunity, right, to be where I am today. That being said, I have plenty of friends and family members who were victims of gun violence in the United States and victims of gun violence in Mexico, where I was raised. So when we're talking about removing guns off the street, we're talking about reducing the probability of that gun being used in a violent crime. If it's in someone's home and it's stolen and you didn't even know that you had it or just whatever, like it's gone and that weapon can be used and it's under your name. If guns, as they're saying, is like being produced through ghost guns or like being brought in from different places. The program in San Francisco that I mentioned happens in December. And in December, during the holidays, where money is scarce and people are trying to like buy presents for their family members, put food on the table. Sometimes work might be low, especially if you work in the service industry, like I did for many years, right? Like tips might not be coming in. So like if you have weapons in your home and they're giving you an opportunity, no questions asked, and you're gonna get cash on hand, like that can make a huge difference, right? And I mean, that harkens back to like the idea of like what a guaranteed basic income pilot is. Like people aren't gonna use this money to go simply and like spend it on whatever that people might have this impression on, right? Like, and if they do, so what? Like they take that money, they can go get a pedicure, good for them. They take that money, like they did in what was it, the Bay Area city that they did this guaranteed. Most of it was spent on basic needs. So this money that people have in their hands, they're able to use, right, to reduce the situations that they're in, just simply by being able to turn in this weapon. And just one final thing, a lot of the weapons that are taken, the ones that I've been witness to and like had conversations with community members turning in the weapons and also people who worked on that stuff for years. The San Francisco one has been going on for 10 years. A lot of the weapons that are turned in are by by widowers, people whose family member or their significant other were lost to gun violence, and they have this array of guns in their home that they don't know what to do with. So again, this is an opportunity for people to be able to get rid of this thing that is holding over their lives and get cash for it, something that they can use tangibly to support themselves and the people that they care about.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Downs, what can you tell us there? I understand there's a new law and new ordinance in Albany about safe storage of guns. Can you tell us anything about that?
I don't have that at my fingertips. I don't want to say anything. And then I have a vague recollection, but I don't want to say anything without having it in front of me.
That's perfectly fine. Would anyone want to address, or maybe I can ask Lieutenant Turner about addressing gun violence committed by police. But before you answer, if anybody else has questions they would like to ask, do put up your hand in the reactions here at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then Lieutenant Turner.
I heard what the topic was. Can you ask the question again?
Sure. How do you address gun violence committed by police?
So I think from my perspective, I think the most important thing is to conduct training and to focus on the training that we're receiving. And, you know, we not only for dealing with a shooting situation, which, you know, we're actually doing active shooter training coming up, thinking about, you know, how we respond as a team to a situation like that, and the different, you know, what an officer is going to be thinking about as they go to those calls, what I'm going to be thinking about as a watch commander going to a call like that. But also, you know, our required training, which includes bias-based policing training, and de-escalation training. Our department had the first California state approved de-escalation training. And so I think being consistent with our training is really key in making sure that when we are in a critical incident, that we're making the safe, right decision to keep everybody safe.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not sure if we've got any more questions from anyone? So let me just thank all of you for joining us, the panelists here, and sharing your expertise and knowledge about this subject. Certainly, we all are being affected by it in our communities, and there's a lot of concern about it and still much to learn. But I think what we're going to do is take a little break here, and starting at 8, we are going to commence our regular annual meeting for our league members here to carry out some business. But we're going to take a break for now and start up at 8 o'clock. Thank you very much, and everybody stay safe.
There is one raised hand.
Oh, is there? Okay, then let's go ahead and have them ask their question.
Hi, my name is Ray Weimer. I'm a reporter for the Daily Californian. This question is mainly directed to the panelists from the Berkeley community. I was wondering, we've been talking a lot tonight about a lot of great things around solving the issues of gun violence, but if you could each quickly address where you feel the line between policy creation and policy implementation should be drawn, and which should we prioritize within the near future. Let me know if I need to clarify anything.
I can start that one. That's a really good question. So in Berkeley, we have the structure of our government is such that council passes policy and the city manager implements policy and oversees the departments. That being said, we can pass policies all day long, but if those policies just sit on the shelf, then they don't really amount to any kind of change. It's really important to, like, for example, when we're talking about, community reinvestment and we're trying to launch new programs, it's very important to actually allocate like fiscal resources and from the budget, as well as staff resources from city staff. But it's really important for the community to participate in holding the implementation piece accountable, because it's one thing for us to go up on the dais every two weeks and say, oh, we're going to do this, or we're doing this, and if it's not actually happening, that's a huge problem. So it's really important for folks to put pressure on both us and the city admin to ensure that we are implementing these policies and we are allocating the proper resources, otherwise they'll languish.
I think Councilmember Taplin can sort of, like he said, better speak to like the bigger policy issues as a city. In terms of us as a department, we are in regular sort of communication and relationship with our police accountability board, and they review our policies and help make recommendations, their recommendation body for our policies, and they've had input on several policies to include our use of force policy, etc. We also have a sergeant dedicated to being our overseeing our policies, and in terms of implementation, we actually have monthly trainings that is required by every police employee to review policies, even just not necessarily even new policies, but policies we've had in place for years that we have to make sure we review on a monthly basis.
Thank you. Would anyone else want to address that question?
I can take a stab at it. Thank you for the question. I think I'm very much agree with what Councilmember Taplin said about, like, what's the use of having a policy if you're not actually implementing it. And the truth is, even if we pass something like as historic and fantastic as this reimagining safety package, right? That packet that passed on May 5th. This like, and ideally it's like this phased approach, a ton of money and a ton of ideas and like dreaming big and like reimagining what public safety is. But the truth is, it's like as community organizers, from an organizer's perspective, which all of you are, being a part of the League of Women Voters, which I am, being a part of Latino Students at Berkeley and other community groups, is that when things like this pass, we sign up ourselves for a 2 to 3 year campaign, even when we win, which is crazy, because we're not just asking, not just taking that toll on ourselves, like we got to show up to every meeting, we got to make know what's going to happen, move this along. But we also got to make sure that other community members are along for the ride and they understand what's going on, how you bring them in, and how they can put that pressure that Councilmember Taplin brought up, right? Like, how do we actually inform the public, the community, that this is something that we need to pass, that this is something that we need to hold accountable. And truthfully, one of the biggest reasons why we're like, there's so much hesitancy with the trust that community has with policing and the city governments and all these commissions is because we often are left out of those conversations, as I've said it before, and I will continue to say. And also the things that we believe in are not being passed. So we lose faith in these kinds of systems to actually uphold our values and like put those things forward to enact real change that will impact all of us. So my job as a community organizer, and all of you as well, is to ensure that we're bringing those people in, holding people accountable, both at the city elected office and also the city offices themselves, to make sure that these things happen and we're giving people, you know, that hope and that progress is actually happening.
Thank you. Yeah, League of Women Voters does care about accountability and asking our leaders to help meet standards there. But thanks again, everyone. I think we will take a break here till about 8:05, and